You are listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, a primetime politics podcast from CPAC. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, if Canada, Mexico, and the United States cannot yet come together on the future of free trade in North America, the three countries are coming together as co-hosts for the 2026 World Cup, which included an event on Friday in Washington, D.C., full of glitz and spectacle for the drawing of final groups that determines which countries will play which as they vie for the FIFA World Cup title. But for those of us who are perhaps less concerned about soccer, there are questions about how trade might also figure into the conversation, as the U.S. president said he would be meeting with both Prime Minister Carney and the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. And with that, let's bring in the Bureau Chiefs. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hello to the three of you.
Hi, Michael.
Okay, I'll preface this by saying I don't know your individual interest when it comes to soccer. I do like a good game from time to time. Okay, well that's good. But of course, for the purposes of our discussion, trade talks takes precedence, And I do want to begin with your measure of how important this meeting in Washington is on the sidelines of this FIFA World Cup event. But you know, they are talking on the sidelines just days after Donald Trump said he is once again willing to essentially walk away from CUSMA. How important are the talks, Bob?
Well, look, I mean, anytime you have an opportunity to have a conversation with Donald Trump, with the Mexican Canadian leaders, it's a good opportunity to try to make your points for the importance of North American free trade and integrated economies. I mean, the real issue here is what's going to happen in the spring when the negotiations for the renewal of the CUSMA begin. And, you know, most people in the trade field do not believe that they're going to want to cancel this trade agreement. We heard in Congress this week almost unanimous views from the U.S. business community how important this continental free trade agreement is to the United States. I think what we may end up, so I don't think that we're going to see a cancellation, but I think we may see some instances where there'll be annexes for Canada and annexes for Mexico. But overall, I think we'll get some kind of agreement. It'll probably favor the Americans more so than the current agreement has. I don't think you're going to see a significant change because the U.S. business community is pretty loud, and they're saying that, you know, we actually need Canada and Mexico, and because it's the world's largest trading zone.
Mm-hmm. And already their bottom line's being affected by this. But how important are these kind of talks? You know, trying to squeeze it in, but bearing in mind, for example, in Carney's case, this is the first face-to-face that he's actually had with Donald Trump in months.
And the first for Claudia Sheinbaum. They've met virtually, the Mexicans and Trump. So it's actually a really important, not just the dynamic on stage that we saw in public, that they all seem to be having a good time in high spirits and whatnot, but the fact that they were meeting at length on the sidelines after the event is important. And it is really important at a time when not just those messages are coming from the U.S. business community, but at a time when we have the U.S. trade representative also saying to Politico on Friday that, look, he still may go two separate deals. So that if Sheinbaum and Carney, who appear to be on the same page, are in the same room as Trump and can press him, let's all do this together, this can be worked out. That's an important dynamic. And I know staff were not inside the meeting, and that's a weird dynamic. But the fact that Carney has done some groundwork before this with the Mexican president to ensure they're saying the same message to the president, it's got a better chance perhaps of piercing. Well,
it was interesting to hear from Donald Trump going into that FIFA event. He was getting scrummed a little bit on the red carpet, and he said, oh, we get on well. We get on well. So, you know, it's hard to read the tea leaves.
Breaking news, they get along well. Oh, well, told us.
Exactly. If actions speak louder than words. JD, what do you say about the importance of this type of meeting?
Well, I was reminding myself like what Mr. Carney said a few weeks ago when he answered the questions from a reporter. I think it was at the APEC summit, and he was asked when was the last time he spoke with Mr. Trump, and he said, "Who cares?" I think that's becoming the attitude right now because of trying to solve sectoral tariffs with the United States. It's difficult because you don't get the president's attention for long enough to deal with those issues. And I'm told that I've had a chat with Dominique Leblanc, the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. relationship, and said he had nothing, no discussions at all since Mr. Trump suspended the talks. So it's pretty much empty right now. And there's not much hope that anything else will be accomplished because Mr. Trump's attention goes in one direction for 5 minutes and the other direction for the other 5 minutes. And, you know, it's like that every day. So it's hard to get him to try to solve a file that is important to Canada because his attention span is very limited.
I mean, that threat we heard this week that he might let it expire, he's expressed before. And what he didn't say is, I am going to end it or I am going to kill it. But he could do that. In the next 3 months or 6 months as we approach the deadline, July 1st, for to renew it, we will hear that. Many negotiators in the business community expect more threats of a kind to exact the kinds of concessions that Bob mentioned. You know, he is coming after agriculture, dairy in Canada. He needs better access to Canadian potash, uranium, energy, and aluminum is a big thing for their economy. So I expect more of that.
But I would say this also, when Mr. Trump decided to suspend negotiation, he also said they would slap Canada on a 10% increase for tariffs. It never happened.
Yeah. Don't remind him.
But it never happened. So can you always take Mr. Trump at his words? No. But you see clearly that this is part of his negotiation tactics to raise the possibility of tearing this deal apart. The Congress will not allow that, nor the business community in the United States.
Yeah, and certainly we're seeing that type of domestic pressure on Donald Trump on a number of fronts right now in the United States. So, so watching.
And just one other thing. I mean, if you try to do a separate deal with the Mexicans and the Canadians, you need congressional approval for that. That's not easy. You know, it's just not in the cards.
Okay, well, we will watch and see what happens out of this, as you say, closed-door meeting. What comes out of that, we'll see in the next few days, perhaps. But listen, let's move on right now to national projects, because, you know, those national projects under the Carney government continues with or without talks with the United States. And this week we heard a special chiefs gathering of the Assembly First Nations, and they called on Ottawa unanimously to abandon the MOU that Ottawa signed last week with Alberta. They are expressing concerns about Indigenous consultation. And to that, take a listen right now to the AFN National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak.
Listening to the discussions this week, we're also reminded that even though our rights are being threatened today in new ways, First Nations across this country are stronger than we have ever been. First Nations have overcome great odds to protect our rights, our lands, our laws, our resources, and our waters. First Nations stand with Canada against provincial separatists that want to break this beautiful country apart. We support growth and prosperity for all, but not at the expense of our rights and the government's obligations to First Nations.
Okay, now, and when it comes to national projects, I appreciate the fact that this government has always signaled it wants to move quickly with these projects, but I do wonder whether or not they've just added to the timeline of getting things done by putting consultation with Indigenous nations after an MOU rather than putting it ahead. What do you say to that, Bob?
Well, look, they're negotiating with the government of Alberta. They're not negotiating with the government of BC or First Nations. That is the next stage of negotiations. I actually thought that the AFN meeting was very productive. When you heard the Prime Minister speaking and the Minister speaking, the Indigenous leaders or communities have a lot of, they want to be part of the resource development. They want to benefit from them. They want their people to have jobs. They want to enjoy the economic benefits from that so that they can enrich their communities. And that's the kind of message I got from them. They also want the federal government to have clean water in their communities. And he answered that pretty emphatically, which is that I think we have like 36 or 39 communities that still need clean water, and there's going to be a new water bill coming forward. To me, you can look for all the negative stuff in these kind of meetings, because there are 600 bands in this country, and none of them ever agree on anything. But I thought that the message coming out of this was chiefs that are willing to sit down and negotiate with the federal government. They have some things on their, certainly they don't want to see the ban lifted on the Pacific Northwest coastal oil tanker ban, but you didn't get a sense, I didn't get a sense, frankly, that they were unwilling to not negotiate. They just want the federal government to sit down with them, and then presumably the industry will have to sit down with them. Let's see where this goes. I mean, we're very early stages on this.
Yeah, Tonda?
I think that it was really interesting that the Prime Minister, for the first time that I can tell, set out his own understanding of what the Indigenous rights are under the United Nations Declaration. He framed it very clearly as the Crown having a duty to consult and accommodate, but he clearly, for the first time under his government, set out that it also is not a blanket consent, that they will negotiate to a point and consult to a point. And he has also set out a timeline for it, as in it happens now once there is actually a proposal, and it's the Alberta government and the companies to negotiate rights and benefits, equity stakes for Indigenous communities, something they welcome. But I think there was also a clear message that was put back to the Prime Minister, which is you can't outsource that, and you can't exclude us from the get-go. And whether or not that's a message that's compatible with Mr. Carney's plans under this major project, it's still one he needed to hear. And what I found interesting is that, yeah, a lot of ministers showed up, and there were some really interesting exchanges. I also thought that was interesting that the Energy Minister, Mr. Hodgson, who'd been so flippant about the travel timing concerns that those coastal First Nations had about meeting him last week, were so dismissed. He was supposed to appear, but they did that meeting behind closed doors, perhaps to avoid sort of what happened to Mr. Poilievre one time when he showed up there. And this did not happen to the Prime Minister. They didn't get up and turn their backs on him. So, you know, that speaks to a different dynamic, but I think a dynamic that is still very much in play and fluid.
Here's JD.
I think the main message from the chiefs was that the Prime Minister must not treat First Nations as an afterthought, that they have to be included early in the process. Now, building a pipeline still remains an abstract project. So what is there to negotiate right now? Nothing, because there's not a private sector promoter for that project. BC has yet to give its okay, although BC is, you know, is how can I say that?
In flux?
They're open now to pipeline in the north, but as long as the tanker ban remains in place. So BC is moving. But still, I mean, the main message that I took from the meeting of this week at the Chiefs was, do not treat us as an afterthought, otherwise you will run into trouble. And that's true. And I think Mr. Carney's message is that if we do something, we want to make sure that you benefit from it, that you may have ownership of some of those big projects, and that will bring you know, economic benefits to your community. And that's, I think, a very appealing message from the Prime Minister.
You know what struck me, though, about it is if you are determined for a pipeline to go from Alberta to the BC West Coast, and do so through Prince Rupert or Kitimat, you're still, at the end of the day, dealing with a number of different nations, including the Wet'suwet'en Nation, which we saw with Northern Gateway, you know, many, many years ago. And still, you know, there seem to have been no lessons taken out of that to try to clear the way. If this is the path you want, why not have negotiated that first?
Because the path hasn't been landed on yet. And they are, I think, putting their eggs in the basket of they don't need unanimous consent from all the nations that form perhaps that group, the Coastal First Nations. They only need the consent of the people and the nations along the actual route and at the terminus, whatever port they choose. So, you know, I think, yeah, all of this is very much dependent on which pipeline we're talking about, but Carney's opened the door to one or more.
And that brings me, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the cabinet shuffle this week of bringing back Marc Miller back into cabinet. This is a very strong message to First Nations because he was quite popular while he was minister in charge of services to First Nations and also Crown First Nation relations. And when he was moved away from that portfolio, a lot of people in the First Nations community deplore the fact that he was gone because there was good and trust built between the government and the First Nations, thanks to Mr. Miller.
Okay, well, you did get ahead of yourself because that's my next question. it has to do with Marc Miller. So here he is back after first.
You can't tame us, eh?
I know. I still love all three of you. But obviously excluded from the first two cabinets of this prime minister. Now back in because Stephen Guilbeault steps aside. You started the conversation, so I'll pick up with you, Bob. What is the strength of bringing Marc Miller back to cabinet?
Competence. He's a very competent minister. We all know this. We've all watched him in his various portfolios, whether it was Indigenous relations, and then which he did some major land claim agreements, and then he came in and really did a big job starting to fix the immigration problems that this government, the Trudeau government, had really screwed up over the last 10 years. This is a guy who he listens to the bureaucracy, but he's also independently trying to get things done. So it's not like his deputy minister and the department's telling him what to do. This is a minister who's really in charge of his department. And he's got a very good reputation in this town. Most people wouldn't even know who he is, but because he's a very competent minister, and he's, from our perspective as journalists, he's so willing to sit down and talk to us at any moment, no BS or anything. He just gives you the story.
Yeah. He tries to substantively engage on questions of policy and politics. Mr. Carney tries to substantively engage on questions of policy only, oftentimes ignoring the politics around an issue. And actually, politics really matter around a lot of these big issues, and Miller is good at dealing with them in a head-on manner. And you saw evidence of that a couple of times this week, both on the language file in Quebec, but you saw it on the development of any pipeline project, where he also said you have to do those consultations in person. You can't do them from a desktop. And that was a direct shot at the way this government and perhaps its energy minister have been dealing with the First Nations. So he speaks not only candidly when you ask him a question, but he actually, I expect, speaks truth to power behind closed doors.
I will say when he made that comment about the Indigenous consultation should have happened beforehand, I actually questioned how open is this government to that level of candidness from one of their own, cabinet members.
We'll see,
Give the Prime Minister credit. Guilbeault was out, Guilbeault has been out there criticizing the government's position on the oil pipelines and
Naderskin Smith has come out. Patrick Weiler, a BC
and
MP,
there's
has come out.
they're not, clamping down on these guys and saying you can't do this. This is actually refreshing. As long as they support the government, which I'm assuming they will, they should be free to go out there and be able to express some of their opinions. And good on Marc Carney so far, anyway.
So far,
letting this go.
We'll see if they get away with it for how long, because that's not something we've seen in this town under either Trudeau or Harper. A lot of MPs were disciplined when they broke ranks with party on certain policies. You'd have to go back to Martin and Chrétien days when Liberal MPs or any MP within a caucus was free to speak their mind. So, let's see how long it lasts. We're only seeing the early signs of it, right?
Before he was named again to cabinet, I had a few conversations with Mr. Miller, and he was telling me that he was getting bored. He needed some actions, and he was sort of leaning on maybe an exit. And I think this is, as Bob mentioned, it's a way to bring back a very competent minister into the fold, and also a person who doesn't is not afraid of giving his marching orders to the bureaucracy to fix things. We saw that in the immigration file very eloquently. He fixed within a few months what the problems had been accumulating for a number of years, and he doesn't get the credit he deserves on that file, but he did fix it. And he also, while making sure that fixing immigration, he didn't penalize the immigration of francophones outside of Quebec, which was a priority of the government as well. So kudos to Mr. Miller.
Yeah, except that, and you brought up the language file. He did cause some controversy by the comments he made about the status of French in Quebec. What do you make of that?
I think he only, as Tonda mentioned, he spoke the truth. He said nothing that scandalized me about the decline of French. He said, yes, it's a fact, but I'm tired of talking about it from electors or identity perspective, which what the Quebec government is doing. So he doesn't get along very well with the Quebec government, so we know that for a fact. François Legault does not hold Mr. Maybe he has his picture in his room and throw darts. But other than that, I think he said the truth. Nothing scandalized me, but the separatists in Quebec used that to attack him and attack the federal government, and led to some very deplorable comments from the PQ leader and even François Legault. And I think they went too far. They realized that today, and Mr. Miller, I think, comes ahead because he wanted to speak about policies, not politics, on that very critical file.
Yeah, well, we'll see the impact that he has on this cabinet, since not everything can fall on Dominic LeBlanc and Steve McKinnon. So we'll see where it all goes. Okay, so let's shift now to Tonda's favorite part of our conversation: the yays and the nays of the week. Bob, I'll begin with you.
My yay is the Vatican for returning Indigenous artifacts. As we know, the Catholic Church has had a very fraught relationship with Indigenous communities, largely because of sexual and other abuses during the residential schools. 100 years ago, they took a bunch of Indigenous artifacts and put them in the Vatican. When in 2023, when Indigenous leaders went to the Vatican and where the Pope apologized for the residential sexual abuse, they saw that, oh my God, there's a bunch of our artifacts here. And so they asked for it to be returned. It's finally been returned. And that's a wonderful thing for these communities. And it also speaks to, frankly, the Catholic Church realizing that they have a duty to respect these communities in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add to that. Your former colleague and ours, Joyce Napier, who's now the ambassador to the Vatican on behalf of the Canadian government, did a lot of work on that, and it's produced results. It's impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And your nay?
My nay is the government. The Carney government seems to be is dragging its feet on naming a commissioner for foreign agent registry, which they'd promised it in the summer, and then they promised it in the fall, and we're heading in. The House is going to break for the Christmas break next week, and we still do not have that registry. And it's really an important one because we need to know who is lobbying on behalf of foreign governments like China in this country. And this was one of the key recommendations that came out of the foreign interference inquiry, which the government accepted, and they seem to be not so willing to do this now, and I hope that's not the case.
Okay. Tonda, yays and nays?
Well, I'm going to do a bit of a throwback to the early part of the week, to the Parliamentary Press Gallery dinner, to not just the fact that Mr. Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, came to it, which was delightful to see him there. He put some effort into the appearance. He mocked far and wide, lots of people, himself included. He took some great shots, and people can find that on
CPAC.
On CPAC's website. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to see him having fun, and the NDP interim leader Don Davies just killed it, owned the room with some terrific jokes. But I just want to underscore that I think that dinner is interesting, not just because somebody shows up and makes fun or roasts or doesn't roast the people that we expect them to. It's one of those rare, all-partisan, cross-party events in this town, in the parliamentary calendar, where people kind of come together, laugh, talk, and sort of become just normal people, exchanging some goodwill through a night. And I think it bridges some distance between some of them. So yay to that. My nay, it's just slipped my mind.
It had to do with data.
Is it May?
Of data.
Not the, well, I was going to, the data, thank you. Well, there was two data ones. See, I was thinking about, no, but I ditched one.
Yeah, okay.
The two data now that I've mentioned too, I have to quickly say the Alberta government has put forward some regulatory changes that kind of raises questions in some environmentalist minds as to their commitment about actually toughening the industrial carbon price, because they're allowing sort of a flood of the carbon market out there. But the other one I was going to say was the Conservative Party. I'm now racing to get through it. The Conservative Party losing control of the personal data, financial data, and other personal information of hundreds of their candidates, with very little transparency to the people affected about why that happened and what's actually going on. So I think that's quite surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. JD.
My A goes to Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre for showing up to the gallery dinner. I think it's part of the functioning of democracy that, at a time when we assemble and make fun of each other, that, every party shows up and do its job. And so I kudos to Mr. Poilievre for showing up. I'm told that his team spent 2 months trying to persuade it until he said yes. So there was a lot of work in background to convince him to do that. And he did it, and he stole the show by eating that apple while the other guys was doing it, another comedian. So that's my A for Mr. Poilievre. And my A goes to, I'll go to Quebec politics again. I'm sorry if I'm boring you, but
not at all.
To Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, that's my A, the Parti Québécois leader, who reacted in a way that is just outrageous to the fact that some members of the artist community commended the nomination of Marc Miller as the new culture and identity minister. He told them that they were lacking loyalty to Quebec because they mentioned Mr. Miller's nomination, and so I thought this was outrageous. And what does it say when we have an election campaign in Quebec and he's promising, remember, a referendum campaign? So that is leaving a very bad taste in my mouth right now.
It's questioning people's loyalty to where they're from.
Exactly.
It's the questioning of Mark Carney's loyalty to Canada, Mr. Miller's loyalty to Quebec. It's unnecessary. It's ineffective, and it's mean.
It's Donald Trump politics. That's what it is.
Okay. Because I prepared it, because I was put on the spot last week with Tonda, just very quickly. My A this week is to Don Davies, because after a very plodding speech that preceded him, it was a nice palate cleanser to have him give a very self-effacing speech. Again, you can see that at CPAC.ca. The other one also dealing, my nay, in relation to the Parliament Press dinner, not naming names, a couple of shots were taken against an individual. For an incident really that stems back 10 years ago, and I just thought it's too easy, it's too cheap. And I agree with you, these dinners are great because we can get to know each other, but part of it is kind of knowing what's the line between having fun and just being mean. And for me, it was just a little bit too mean. So let's be nice to each other. Okay, our look ahead now, that's the next segment. What are you looking forward to in the next few days here, Bob?
Next week, the House shuts down. That's what I'm looking forward to. This has been such a busy year.
It has been.
And it'll either be Wednesday night or Thursday. They're out of town.
Bye-bye.
But it'll be bye-bye. But with Carney, he keeps working, so I don't know how much of a rest it's going to be for us. But I'm crossing my fingers.
Yeah, at least until the first week of January, please.
Next week, we're close to the anniversary of when Chrystia Freeland resigned and set all of that in train.
Yeah,
So, crazy. I guess I'm looking forward to seeing what the government does. They have this hate crimes bill in play. There's a lot of politics going on about whether or not the government should remove defense from criminal law that excuses certain speech that might otherwise be deemed hate speech in the name of religious faith and religious texts. So there's a lot of politics at play. I'm interested in that because I think it tells us more than just about that hate crimes law and what it should look like. I think it tells us a lot about how these parties are working to move things through Parliament, the relationships that are going on. In some cases, a bit of distrust that is building. So I'm looking at that.
Okay. Joël-Denis?
Same thing as Bob. The next week will be the last week of the session. No, I want a break from myself and from everybody, I guess.
But not Michael.
No. I'm taking notes.
But that's going to be interesting to watch on what note Parliament ends.
Yes.
That will, I think,
Yeah.
will dictate how people will come back in January, whether they're going to be in a good mood or a bad mood, or if it's a bad mood, that may mean a spring election. So watch out.
Okay, well, rest up if there's going to be a spring election. I will say I'm looking forward to our final discussion before the Christmas break next week. I'm going to put it out there now. I'm going to ask you to kind of give the assessments and how this government has done in this first full sitting for Mr. Mark Carney. So that is the next. We're not allowed to drink by CRTC regulation, but what you bring in your mug is your own business, Tonda, MacCharles. And that is our episode for the week. I'm Michael Serapio. You've been listening to the Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio, Primetime Politics Podcast, which could get more interesting next week from CPAC.
How did Don Martin ever...